Hi, folks. Welcome. Both those of you who are here with us in person in the McGuire Room and also those of us who are joining online via Zoom, welcome to the Traverse Area District Library today. My name is Melissa McKenna. I'm the Assistant Director for Outreach and Adult Services. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the speaker for this afternoon's program. Hugh Grinnell was born in Detroit a long time ago and had close connections with the Grinnell Brothers Music Company. He is the great-grandson of Herbert Grinnell, one of the three Grinnell brothers who founded Grinnell Brothers Music House in 1879 in Ann Arbor. The three brothers were not musically inclined, but they were smart businessmen. The business was infused with the Grinnells from Upper New York, where the three brothers were born, and later welcomed to the company a few more distant cousins, also from New York. They all resided in Detroit. 25 years after the company was founded, the first Grinnell musicians appeared. With the musician's blood inherited from his grandmother and his father, Hugh studied piano and sang with three well-known choral groups in California. He sang in the chorus for three operas and sang backup to Bill Medley of the Righteous Brothers when Bill recorded a top 40 single in June 1968. Bill, with Hugh in the backup chorus, introduced this new song on the Smother Brothers TV show in August 1968. With this music legacy in his blood, Hugh decided to write a book about the Grinnells, both the business side of the Grinnell Brothers Music Company and the musical side of the many descendants who performed professionally around the United States. So let's sit back and enjoy this musical program, and please silence your cell phones. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. You've been looking at a photograph of the Grinnell Brothers main store on Woodward Avenue in Detroit. I'm going to tell you the whole story in about 45 minutes. First of all, we're going to go back in time, 1841. Ira Grinnell married Betsy Balcom in Barr, New York. And Barr is in the upper New York between Rochester and Niagara Falls. They had 7 children. In 1863, Lucretia, the name she preferred, married Charles Pulcher in Michigan. That began the Michigan connection. Both parents died 2 years later, leaving 6 children as orphans. Ira Leonard, at age 19, he moved to Michigan to live with his sister, but he really moved to Michigan because he'd met a young lady the summer before in New York, and there were sparks between them. When he moved to Michigan, he also moved my grandfather, Herbert Balcom Grinnell, because he was not a very well young man. So and Ira loved his family, loved all his brothers, but he wanted to be close to Herbert to take care of him. 9 years later, Clayton, now 17 and the baby of the bunch, moved to Michigan to join his brothers. So those are the 3 Grinnell brothers who founded the music company. In 1867, now in Michigan, at Adrian specifically, Ira found work as a farmer's helper, which he had been in New York, so he was used to what he was doing. He made 50 cents a day. He began his sales career by selling sewing machines. Now, what happened was when he moved to Adrian, he said, I want to know a lot about this community. So he did everything he could to find out about businesses and so forth. And one day he was in front of a business and he saw this fellow come out of his store with small crates of something, put them in a wagon, move his horse and leave, and came back in the evening with not a dozen of these crates, but only 2 left in his whole package. Next day, he was up to 12. Out he went. He came back with darn few, if not any. So Ira was really curious. So he crossed the street one day and introduced himself and discovered that this man was selling sewing machines. Do you mind if I go along with you? See what you're doing? Well, sure, hop aboard. So they went out and went to a house. He went up to the front door. By this time, all the men were out working, right? And the women were at home, right? Knocked on the door. She came to the door. He gave her a big smile and introduced himself. Sewing machine? I'd heard about those. Well, would you like to see one? Why, of course. So in he goes, uncrates the sewing machine, sets it up, and after an hour had demonstrated enough, given her lessons, she sat down and left on to the next place. And Ira is thinking, I can do this. So after a couple of these day rides, he walked into the store again. He says, I'd like to buy a sewing machine. I'll pay retail, $18. We paid retail. He went out on his own, a different part of Adrian, sold a machine at the first house, came back, bought 6 more at wholesale, $12, sold those within 2 days, set up his own door-to-door business. Very successful. And after a while, he started to add household items. But after school, Herbert, who was still in high school age, he joined Ira and he started learning the business and would help out wherever he could. Eventually, they found a space in a small store and they added more household items, and that was their business for quite a while. Well, several years later, 1876 precisely, when Clayton had graduated from high school, he moved to join his brothers in Adrian. In 1877, the very next year, he was visiting Detroit. He went down to the river. He was sort of doing a look-see at the big city, and he found this big boat that was tied up there and offloading some crates of whatever. And people would come in their wagons, horse-drawn wagons, some on bicycles, whatever, and they identified the package that they'd purchased and had proof of it. And the captain, okay, it's yours. And this went on for the whole day. Toward the end of the day, there was only one thing left, a great big carton, almost the size of this podium, which was enclosed. So he asked the captain, he says, who's going to pick this up? He says, I'm selling them. I brought them here. I'm selling them. He says, what are they? Musical instruments. May I see them? He looked inside. He bought the whole lot. Everything you could think of in one whole lot, except a piano and an organ. They're a little bit large. But they had these. They brought them back to the store. And guess what? They started selling like wildfire. But now let's see if you can identify, one, the instrument that's playing this, and two, what's the name of the song? Is AIDS. Very next year, after the musical instruments were doing so well, they decided we need to refocus our business. They opened up a business in Ann Arbor, 1879. The 3 brothers, that was where they started. But boy, you'll see what happens in the future. They were smart. They continued to sell the Singer sewing machine, and they picked up, I think it was the White sewing machine. So they picked those up too because they were fairly good at selling. And at that time, they made an arrangement with the Este Organ Company, at the time the largest organ company in the world, to represent the company and sell all 12 of their models. You're looking at the smallest of their models. They had church organs. They didn't stock them, but they could sell them. So that was a very good move. They had the Michigan distributorship for that company. Always having their eye on Detroit, they said, we need to move to Detroit. That's where the people are. That's probably where the business is. In 1882, Herbert, now married and with 5 children, told his brothers, I can't take the Michigan winters anymore with my condition. and now we're going to be adding some smoke. I can't do that. I got to leave. So he did leave. He moved to Alabama where it was warmer, and that was supposed to be the answer. The brothers were in this store for only 2 years, and the reason? Every month, if not every weekend, people from outer cities or towns or burgs possibly would come to Detroit to do major shopping. They were running out of space. They were stocking merchandise on top of merchandise on top of merchandise, and they just had no room. So they'd been eyeing the store across the street, and they moved across the street to now a 4-story building. A lot more room. Now I want you to look at the street level between the two wagons. That first door, the door in the center. This is the only photo I ever found of any of Ira and Clayton's children. But there's Ira and his wife on the right, Clayton and his wife on the left. On the very left, the store manager, I'm guessing, I don't know that. And then young Elmer at age 10, who eventually became a branch office manager and a director of the company. Now in Alabama, Herbert needed to take care of his family. However, he died at age 36, just a few years after moving there, leaving his widow and 5 young children, the oldest being Jay Grinnell. Very little income. What's going to happen? Jay, age 7, is the man of the house. Mom, what are we going to do? Well, they had an idea, and I don't know who wrote the letter, but I'm about to tell you in just a minute after we go through a couple of other items. But Jay is going to make a major move. They moved to another place. Now they had a larger store, still 3 stories high, 40 feet across the front, 120 feet to the rear, almost half an acre of floor space. And they were there for quite a while. This was when Jay, at age 12, either he or his mother wrote to Ira and Clayton, Jay wants to work for Grinnell Brothers. He wants to come back to Detroit so he can make some money and send it home. They agreed, and his 2 uncles took turns at however long he lived with them, took turns moving him around. The move to Detroit from Birmingham, Alabama is 725 miles. How do you think he got there all by himself? Train? He may have been on a couple of freight cars going north. We don't know the whole story, but that's how he got to Detroit by himself. They gave him the best job they possibly could at $3.50 a week. He was the assistant to the janitor. But that turned out to be a marvelous move because what do janitors do? They clean every floor, go into every office, every level, every story. He got to meet the managers, the employees. He got to learn what they were doing. He got to learn pricing. He was used as a delivery boy locally, close to the store, probably on a bicycle. He could handle a horse and wagon, but he delivered things as well. He knew almost the whole business because of that very fortunate assignment. About this time, Ira and Clayton got together. You know what? There's still a lot of people coming in from Adrian. There are a few from Kalamazoo, and we found some from Pontiac and so forth. Maybe we need to order or open some branch stores. Well, here's a map of Lower Michigan. You see 2 red dots on there because when they were in Ypsilanti for less than a year, they kept that store open when they moved to Detroit. So it was essentially a branch store, and they were in Detroit. 1893, they opened their first branch store in Adrian. They knew that well, knew the country, knew the people, figured that was a safe bet. It was so successful that 4 years later, 4 years later, they opened one in Kalamazoo, which was a larger city at that time than Ad- uh, Adrian. And turned out Kalamazoo was the highest producing branch store for about a dozen years. So that was a good move. And they really stretched it a little bit. They opened one in Bay City. Bay City's got a lot of history, and you're going to hear some of it. About this time, also, they hired an advertising guy. And he said, I don't need to make ads for the 7 different locations that exist right now. I'll make one, and we'll just change the address at the bottom and send them to the newspapers. And that's how we're going to do our business. Great idea. Well, you can see the pianos that they started to represent now that they had some space. Steinway and Sons, right off the top. Sommer, Schoninger, Sterling, and some names I've never heard of myself. Possibly you haven't, but they had 12 piano companies that they represented. They sold guitars, violas, banjos, and so forth. They were hooked up with Martin and hooked up with Gibson. So they had a pretty good source of excellent musical instruments. And they maintained the ST Organ Company. And they were known as an organ company before they started selling pianos because of the ST organ. Good move. That same year, in 1898, they got an exclusive arrangement with Martin to be the Martin distributor for Michigan. Boy, was that smart. Was that smart. And Gibson, being in Grand Rapids, I believe, at the time, followed rather closely behind. Jay is now 19 years old, 7 years experience. The very first manager of the Bay City store. The first year he was in there, one day, probably just a couple months into the opening of the store, a young lady walked in, Mary Elizabeth Murphy. She introduced herself as having just graduated from high school, and she has been taking piano lessons for many years. She'd like to know if she could play some of their pianos. Why, of course. And she was rather attractive to young Jay. Why, of course. He offered her a job after she played for about an hour and a half. She was terrific. She played classical music, current music, ragtime. She played the whole thing. And I'll tell you now, so I don't forget in the future, she was the first woman to ever receive a musicians union membership card. First woman in the US. She was hired by small bands in Detroit and big bands, and she played piano at the silent movie theaters. And they married in 1900. My grandmother. She was the first musician in the family. The Grinnells didn't have musical blood. She sure did. 1902, the brothers again were thinking this over. You know, we're selling pianos from 12 different companies. We're doing well, but it comes from their factory with a markup, to a distributor to a markup, to a retail outlet who marks it up 40%, and then the customer pays that. We can manufacture our own pianos and sell them in our own stores with one markup for profit. And the piano is as good as they come. That's what they did. And here are the delivery boys wanting to take a picture on their delivery wagon. So they all gathered together. Okay, I've already talked about these places, these branch offices, and now Jackson was opened in 1901, Port Huron in 1902, hold your breath, Traverse City in 1902, and I just passed the corner where it was, down Front Street on the corner with Cass in Front Street, that big brick building that's there. I got a picture of it, you'll see it later on. Might even see it next. There it is. There it is. That building still stands. 159. We passed it today going to lunch. 159. Okay, the early management of that store, Mr. Cliff was the first manager. After 5 years, Mr. Bennett became the manager, and Cliff was promoted to go to Detroit. He was a pretty good guy. 1908, oops, he returned as manager because Cliff wasn't doing so well, and Mr. Bennett remained in the store. 1909, Mr. Ernest Smith became manager. How did this happen? Are these guys no good? No, they're all promoted. He became manager and went from Traverse City to Kalamazoo because Traverse City was the highest producing branch store of all of them. But Kalamazoo was a little bit larger and they think they had a better market. So that's where he goes. And the newspaper said goes to Kazoo, the eye-catching header in the Evening Record, March 7th, 1910. How many of you were here? No, that's not. And it says that Mr. Smith was promoted to become the manager of the Kalamazoo branch, which was the biggest or largest branch store of the 18 branches at that time. And there was their delivery wagon. That picture appeared in the Traverse City Record Eagle. Sort of neat. I don't think, however, I'd like my piano delivered that way. This is the Petoskey, the only photograph I could find of the Petoskey store. I discovered this not 2 weeks ago, and is Don here? Right here, this gentleman right here. He and I met on Facebook about a month ago. He was advertising some Michigan pictures, and he sent me this photograph and another one, but he sent me this photograph, and I almost had time enough this morning driving back from, where was I, Mackinac City, to stop in there, but I was running out of time. I wanted to go in there and say hi, and hey, you guys, it's a dentist's office now. Okay, Albert Kahn was a name that architects would know. He was an architect. He designed the Chrysler Building in New York City and several other famous buildings. He moved to Detroit because New York was starting to have a lot of architects. Detroit was smaller, but had a lot of potential. So he moved and he opened one of the more interesting buildings, I don't remember the name of it, on Belle Isle in the Detroit River. He designed and built that structure. The brothers Grinnell hired him to design what they wanted. They wanted a special looking building, so when people looked at it, they would say, that's Grinnell Brothers, with a little bit of awe and so forth, and it brings tears to my eyes. It's really, anyway, he's the one who designed it. And that was his design. Actually, that was the photograph. I have his design on the front of one of the books. Those vehicles that you see there, no problem with parking spaces. Henry Ford opened his factory in 1903, produced his first car in 1903. By that time, Grinnell Brothers was 24 years old and was selling over $1 million of merchandise every year when Henry Ford started. At that time, the music business was the biggest business in Detroit. Not only the retail stores, but some manufacturing and also performers. And you'll hear about some here pretty quick. The Detroit Free Press wrote a 3-page article, and you're going to see some photos here in just a minute. They called it the veritable temple of music. It's a great way to have people want to come downtown and see it. This is the first floor. When you walk in the front door, you walk into flowers that are changed daily on 7 floors. And this is where where the executive offices and bookkeeping, band instruments were down there, tuning department, ticket office, of course, because they sponsored a lot of concerts. This is the basement. They used the entire basement of that store for the sheet music department. They had a lot of sheet music when they were in the last store. They had purchased one from a guy that was his only business, and he was retiring, so they purchased about 400,000 copies of sheet music. They built this for 1 million copies of sheet music. And in a matter of just a few years, they filled it. Now, the sheet music, it wasn't 1 million different songs. It was like a dozen or two of this song and that song and so forth. And it was changing frequently because of what was starting to happen with music. This is the 5th floor, pianos and organs. By the way, on the very right hand of this picture, you can see white something up and down. And the very first picture I showed you, the white pillars, they had 2 rows of 6 pillars holding up this 20-floor building. 6 rows of these that went straight up. They were concrete on the outside, steel on the inside, and then painted white. And they designed it so that they could blend it in with their departments and so forth. Very, very beautiful design building. One day, my grandfather, Jay, I didn't say he was my grandfather, but I'm very proud to say he is, or was. He was back in Detroit. And his wife, Mary, was playing in the silent movies at the same time. But he was on the 5th floor. He was the salesman of the day. And in walks a man and his daughter from Connecticut. He introduced himself as Sam and Clara. And he said they'd taken the train from Connecticut to Detroit because they heard of Grinnell Brothers, that was the place to go. That's pretty decent stuff. She was a concert pianist and an opera soprano and had been working and learning in Europe for about 6 years. So now she was ready to go. Jay said, play all the pianos you want to. They're here, they are all here. You choose what you want. In the meantime, Sam got a hold of Jay and said, hey, I have an upright Steinway piano. And he described it, and he said that it was almost brand new, da-da-da-da. She wants a concert grand piano to practice on because she wants to be the best there is. Jay said, yes, you can. Oh, and Sam said, can I trade this in against the new piano? He said, yes. So he said, I'm not only going to do that, he says, I'm going to deliver it to you, one of my trucks in Connecticut, and then I'm going to pick up your Steinway. And he had in his head right here, I'm going to give it to Mary because she doesn't have a piano to practice. So we went right to Virginia Park in the beautiful part of Detroit. Well, have you made a selection? And she came back and she said, no, I'm down to 2. I like the Steinway grand piano. It's beautiful. I love the Grinnell Brothers grand piano. It's beautiful. Go back, choose either one you want. So she came back. I like the Grinnell Brothers piano. So that made everybody happy. Well, there's a couple of tag notes on this thing. That piano went to their home. And then when he retired in 1941 and moved to California, the piano came out there. They had the piano for about 25 years while they were alive. And when they both died at he was age 67, or 87, she was 85. Within about 6 weeks of each other, I didn't know this, but they gave me the piano. I had that Steinway in my apartment, and I got married in my home. Then we moved to, this was all in California. We moved to Arizona, my hometown, had it there until she bought me a Grinnell Brothers grand piano. And I gave the Steinway to my nephew. All I can tell you is it was an upright in blonde and very heavy. I didn't move it. Heavier than I can lift. Okay, there's one thing I haven't mentioned. Sam was Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain. And he had this picture taken to send to Jay sort of a Thanksgiving for being so nice or whatever. So I'm pleased that I ran across that photo. This is my dad. He's the second musician in my family, probably the most accomplished, probably the best known. He was a banjo player, as you can see. He played in Detroit. He had his own little group. They were doing vaudeville. He went bankrupt doing vaudeville, came back to Detroit. He joined an orchestra called the Orange Blossoms, and it was the very first and only orchestra at the Casa Loma in Toronto. The Casa Loma had gone into bankruptcy. 3 guys bought it, and they decided to make it a hotel, and they hired the Orange Blossoms, and Dad was the only percussion guy there on the banjo. The very next year, 1930, the banjo came out of popularity with big bands, and they went to the guitar, and he was already on the guitar. But when he was about 35, he wrote this tune, which he called Manicure, and you are going to hear the whole thing. This is not fast speed. That was recorded in 1950, mid-1950s in Tucson, where we lived, and I still own the original vinyl record that it was recorded on. And I had no electronics, no. And I had this converted to digital so I could put it on here just for you folks. First time I've shown this. Okay, now you're seeing where the branch offices were starting to get out in Michigan. Let's see what happened. They had 43 branch offices. They had 2 in Windsor, Canada. They had 2 eventually in Toledo, Ohio. And they had the remaining 40, if my numbers are right, all in Michigan, including 5 in the Upper Peninsula. They were all over the place. And you'll notice not only Traverse City, but Charlevoix, Petoskey, and close by the photograph I showed you earlier, Boyne City. But that's what happened. They got big. They sold more Steinway pianos over the life of the firm than any other company in the world. They sold more than 80,000 of their own pianos, far outselling Steinway. Very successful business. Here is a Steinway being played for you. If you know the name, tell me, because I don't know the name of the song. That's it. Okay. In 1922 or 3, a young Lloyd Grinnell, one of the New Yorkers, come to Detroit. Had just completed his service in World War I as a sergeant, and he was in Detroit, and he came into the business. He was hired, and he sold radios door to door to start. In 1934, he heard about a music festival in Indiana, and he thought he'd just go listen and maybe pick up some ideas. Well, he came back to Detroit absolutely excited, and he got a hold of the president. I can't think of his name. Albert Grinnell. Grinnell? How could I miss that? He got a hold of Albert and said, I want to talk to you. We should sponsor a music festival in Michigan, and we should have it for students, and we should expect several hundred students, and we can provide the pianos, and we'll fund it. So they got an arrangement with the Michigan Teachers Association, I don't know the correct name, so that they would contact all of the students in the state of Michigan. And that was one of the requirements. You had to be from Michigan to get into this. So they started this in 1935. I've already said some of these things. They would provide the pianos and the organs, and I'm talking probably 200 at each festival location. Several hundred students were expected. 3 venues over time would accommodate this. One was the State Fair Coliseum, one was Olympia Stadium, and more recently was Cobo Hall. So the students would come there, but before they came there, they had to practice, because these are 8 to 18. This is the second floor of the Grinnell Brothers building on Woodward Avenue. It was purposely wide open for concerts, to host singers of the day and their shows on the road. They hosted a lot of things, and they used it for a full month for rehearsals by these students. Now there would be 60 students at a time on 30 pianos and organs, and in order to do this for each student, they sat 2 on a bench. Usually 2 girls and 2 boys. Occasionally there was a boy and a girl on a bench playing the same piano. They had to rehearse. They had to rehearse 4 times so they would know the music. And this is where they rehearsed. 3 days a week, not each group, but it had to be 3 days a week, 3 hour sessions in each of those times to get all several hundred students rehearsed and ready to go. That is a photograph from a newspaper. That's why it's so fuzzy. I couldn't get a better picture. I believe this is in Cobo Hall. And if you were to take your time and count those pianos, which I did only once, it was over 200. And they had organs in there as well. But that's how they set up. They always had this semicircle, and the conductor was in front of the flat part. And the audience consisted largely of parents who would leave after this, and then an hour later the new group would come in, and then they'd fill the place. So this was quite a deal in Michigan. After the concerts, those pianos went on sale. Why? They were used pianos. They couldn't sell them as new pianos, so they sold them as used. And they had not all of them. No. They had their own, certainly. They had Steinway, they had Kimball, they had all kinds of pianos from the various stores. They would get them in there. Now these banners, these little flags, were color-coded. I don't know what the color code meant, but when it was pinned on a piano, it had something to do with the sale price and or the type of piano, whatever. Okay, I bring this up now because I want to introduce you to who has become a good friend of mine, Marlo Dickinson. When I was doing my final research for writing my book, I was here last May, and I spent 20 hours in the Detroit library. And they had 12 boxes of 50 manila folders in each box. I went through every folder to find what I wanted. They had 8 boxes that were about this wide and this high for posters and promotional photographs. I went through every one of those and took what I wanted. They also had a newspaper search, Detroit News Press, or Detroit News, or the Detroit Free Press, or whatever Michigan town I wanted, so I could get some information. But here, on the Friday, I had the Friday, they only opened it till noon. I drove to Holly, Michigan, about 55 miles north of Michigan. I drove to Holly because that's where they owned the largest piano factory in the world. They produced 2,500 pianos every year. And I drove there to see, I knew the factory had burned down, but I drove there so I could see where it was, but I wanted to take a photograph of the buildings that Grinnell Brothers, the houses that Grinnell Brothers built for the employees that came as far as Austria. They got marvelous, marvelous people to manufacture these pianos. And the Austrians were cabinet makers, and those cabinets in which the pianos were housed, they were rosewood, they were black ebony, they were white, they were peach. They had a lot of stuff. And you could order a piano and say, I want that piano, but I want this color. And that's what they'd get. It's crazy, but that's what they did. Anywho, while I was there in Holly, I gave about a 15-minute presentation. They were knowing I was coming to let the people know what I was doing. And I had some slides, and I came to the Historical Society there and walked in, and there were maybe 15, 16 people in a small room, the largest room they had, there to hear me talk and see my little presentation. And after this, a lot of them came up, hi, I'm so-and-so, and this is my connection. I used to work in the factory. I met a lot of people who worked there. Anyway, they all left except one woman who was sitting on a couch and the director, Linda Smith, who I'm going to see here next week. She said, Mr. Grinnell, I'd like you to meet, I got to think of her name again, Marlo Davidson. Okay, hi, Marlo, how are you? She says, would you like me to take you around Holly and see things that you... Absolutely, that'd be lovely. I'll get my car, I'll just follow you. She says, no, I'll drive, and I'll bring you back here. Okay, that'll be just fine. So I've got my camera out of the car, off we go. She says, in 1935, when I was in grade school, my mother bought me a piano after the festival. Would you like to see it? You bet I would. So we went to her house, and there was a piano covered with flower pots and books and papers and all kinds of stuff. I said, how often do you play? She says, I still do play, but not very often. I said, would you mind if I cleared this off and took a picture? She says, no, that'd be fine. So we cleared it off and dusted it and so forth. And there's the piano from her living room. In the lower right, inside, Grinnell Brothers Festival piano. So she wasn't telling me a fib. I didn't think she was, but I got to do it. And this is a Kimball. But that's how that went. Well, Grinnell Brothers not only sponsored the music festival for school-aged children, they sponsored, I can't think of the term. Well, they sponsored a scholarship for opera singers, for accordion players, and concert, or hope to be concert pianists who were at least in college or graduated. So they sponsored these scholarships, and here's an example. This young man, Thurman Bailey, received a $2,000 scholarship to play piano and 2 years of training at Juilliard School of Art. And Lloyd Grinnell had set up the foundation back in 1934, and this is a blank check from one of them. I wanted to fill it out, but I found out the account was closed. Grinnell Brothers sold the first TV in the United States. It was an RCA. They always had household items. They had appliances. They had imported furniture from the Orient and from Europe. They could sell anything and everything. So they had 1 or 2 floors dedicated to that type of merchandise. But of course, it was a music company, and that's what really happened. You can read the fine print. Yeah, that's my picture. I was going through, sitting in the library, I was going through the Detroit News, and I was putting in the name Grinnell, 1940s. And then things would pop up, and no, here's a good one, I'll keep this one. Some of which I used in my book. I got to the 1950s, and I was looking through, and all of a sudden this guy came up, and I thought, oh my goodness. I had seen that because when we were here in 1954 on a tour, I was a member of the Tucson, Arizona Boys Chorus. And we were on a 10-week tour of the Midwest and Ontario. I didn't know this, and I learned later on that anytime a boy in the traveling group went to a hometown, they would have this sent to their local newspaper so that it would be promoted. And when I got there and the director was introducing, there were 3 of us from Michigan, but not from Detroit. And he introduced this guy, and he left me till last, and he says, and here's Hugh Grinnell from Detroit, and his family owned Grinnell and Sons. He says, is that right? I said, no, sir, it's Grinnell Brothers, and the audience applauded. It was fun. But what I'm going to do for you, what do you do in Tucson, Arizona when you sing? Well, that's where the cowboys are. Oh, this guy I'm going to see day after tomorrow in Holly. He retired there. I know he's there. He doesn't know I'm coming with his photograph. He was in the chorus too. This is what we say. As I was walking one morning for pleasure, I spied a cowpuncher riding alone. His hands thrown back, such in the and as he approached, he was singing this song. You know this group? Everybody here should know this group. I put it up there because there was a very, very strong relationship between Grinnell Brothers and Motown. Motown, 1957-58, was just getting off the ground, and Berry Gordy would go to high schools around Detroit when they had talent shows, and he'd listen to these groups that were singing, and he was amazed with some of the groups that he heard. But people from Motown who ended up with, or people from the high schools who ended up in Motown, Stevie Wonder, I'm not going to remember all the names, I should have a piece of paper here. The groups, the Marvelettes, what's the girl singers? Diane. There we go. Yep. The Supremes, Marvin. Oh, all of them. High school. That's where we got them. Well, one thing that's interesting is these young kids who wanted to make it big would go to Motown. They had 2 buildings. There was the one that's still standing as a museum now, which is being expanded, and one across the street, which was sort of a practice room with 2 pianos. And dozens of these kids wanting to do their thing. Not only perform, but there were writers, composers, and they needed to be able to do what they do, write music, perform. They had to wait for hours for their turn for a 1-hour stint on a piano. So I don't know who approached whom, but Grinnell Brothers moved a piano, probably a spinet, doesn't matter, moved a piano to a home. These homes were all one level, so there were no steps to go up. They moved the pianos into the home, and they sold them for $5 a month. So that the parents, some of the parents worked at the automobile factory, so they were doing all right. But $5 a month until they could pay it off, so they could get started. And I don't know how many pianos went where, but it was a lot. Now, why do I have the Marvelettes here? You don't know. I remember.
Oh yes, wait a minute, Mr. Postman. Wait, hey, 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 Mr. Postman. Mr. Postman.
This was the first number one
Oh yeah.
record on the charts that Motown ever had. First one.
Oh yeah. There must be some word today, yeah. From my boyfriend so far away. Please, Mr. Postman, look and see. Is there a letter for me? I've been standing here waiting, Mr. Postman, so patiently. A card was just a letter. Say he needs returning home to me. Please, Mr. Postman.
Okay, is that enough? Wasn't that neat? I love the Motown sound. I really like it. Detroit, well, Michigan, should be very proud of that group. These are some of the branch stores. Some of the stores opened in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. We actually had some that opened fairly late. The two on the bottom here are from Windsor. Washington Avenue is in Detroit. Grand Rapids, 1940. Monroe, 1940. I'm speaking in Monroe. Flint, Midland. But they're all over the place. This is the history of the presidents of Grinnell Brothers. One non-Grinnell, but he was a well-known person in the music industry. He was the longest running president after Ira Leonard was. 15 years. And after 15 years, he resigned to become president of a music company in New York City. So he was making the big bucks. But there they are. By 1954, Grinnell Brothers had become the largest music company in the world. Can't go wrong with 43 branch offices. That's the front of 1515 Woodward Avenue. You can go there now and you're going to see that it is occupied by LinkedIn. They're leasing the building, and the one next door, which was Saunders Confection, that was their headquarters. The two of them were together. I have no more to say, but I have an awful lot of answers if you have questions. What happened to the music business? Specifically, the music industry.
Yes.
Oh, okay. The Grinnell Brothers. Riots in Detroit in 1967 hurt a lot of companies because people left. Fortunately, none of the Grinnell Brothers stores, branch offices, or the main one, were hurt by rioters. But the fact that there were rioters, people left Michigan in droves. First of all, they moved into the suburbs. And a lot of them just kept going. Just left Michigan. So from a population of 1.8 million, they fell rather quickly to 600,000. A lot of those folks were good customers, ongoing customers. They knew the company. Come back, new sheet music, new records. Hey, we want a new TV, well, a little bit bigger than a 5-inch screen, whatever. They kept coming back. They didn't have that. So by 1981, there was just nothing. They were closing branch stores to try to keep going, closing branch stores to try to keep going. The Japanese market was starting to get a little bit bigger. Guns were less expensive. That's what happened.
Okay.
1981.
Factory closed really what year?
Okay, Grinnell Brothers sold the factory to another piano company in the 1960s.
What company was that?
I don't remember. It's in the, by the way, it's in the book, but I don't remember. In 1970, nobody knows why, the factory caught on fire and burned to the ground. Absolutely to the ground. So I knew when I went there last year, I saw where it was. I couldn't tell it. I want to talk a little bit about the book. If you don't mind. I want you to know that this book doesn't have any music in it, so don't be disappointed. You heard me speak now about 4,500 words. I'm a public speaker on other topics too. 4,500 words. This book has over 60,000 words. There's so many things I haven't been able to touch on because of time. It's in a larger print. The font is 14 point, so it's easy reading. It comes in black and white in 2 colored versions. Glossy paperback, black and white. Oh, that's the artist rendering I told you was on the front of the book. That's the artist rendering. And then the colored, we saw that picture before. That's a hardbound book. They're all on sale on this tour. You can buy them from Barnes & Noble, either their store or online, bn.com, simple enough. Low pay sales tax, low pay shipping. You won't get my autograph if that means anything. Are there any more questions? I'd be delighted to. Yes.
What were some of the brand names of pianos that Grinnell Brothers sold aside? What other ones? And any other company ever launched their pianos through a Grinnell's?
Okay, the answer to that is I've given you a list of 6 or 7 before. I don't know all of them, and I know Kimball, which wasn't on that list at the time because of Marlowe buying the piano. So I don't know any more names than that. I just know that there were about a dozen. And there were other companies that probably approached them and said, would you distribute our piano? Nobody could buy a piano except going into a Grinnell Brothers store. Because the factory to the customer, that's how it worked.
Is there any market for these old pianos?
Oh, yes. Yes, there is. You just look at the Detroit, primarily the Detroit area, but you can just look under the classifieds. My wife bought a Grinnell Brothers grand piano for me in 1989 when I moved back from California to Arizona. That's where she looked, well, at the time they didn't have online, they had catalogs and library information, phone books. Yeah, I'm sure they're out there. And they're good. I mean, they stay. There's a gentleman here who's been in the piano business for 55 years, and he said, "Those were some pianos."
Grinnell uprights back in the early 1900s were the best uprights ever made. And I've seen thousands of pianos tuned, seen all the names, even the names he didn't remember.
I don't remember a lot.
Yeah, I got an ST church organ. You know, you're talking
Yeah.
full cradle bass pedals and all.
Dude, outstanding. Any other questions? Yeah.
Where was the factory?
I'm sorry.
Where was the factory? The piano factory?
Well, they had 3 piano factories. I didn't tell you. I would leave something in the book for you. The first one was 1902. I showed that one. They decided that they ought to get into that business because they could do much better than just reselling somebody else. 1902 was in Detroit. 1907 was in Windsor, Ontario. And all those pianos had to be sold in Canada. But it was very popular in Canada. And then 1913, they moved into the Holly pit. It had been a piano factory from another company, and they doubled the size of it, and they were producing 2,500 pianos a year, over 80,000 pianos in their lifetime. That was in Holly. I'm going to be there next week. Well, I'm going to go in the back. Oh, the second most important thing. Yes, I'm descended from Herbert. I'm his great-grandson. His great-great-grandson, my son, is sitting in the back. Now I want to talk about Ira's great granddaughter. She's sitting in the back. So we are third cousins. Okay, if you like your book dedicated to Mom from Sissy, or to Adam and Eve, or to Jack jumped over there, anybody, any dedication you'd like, I'd be delighted to do it. I'll see you in the back.
Thank you.